Hello, everyone. Hello, hello, hello. My name is Ritu Bhasin, she, her, hers. I am the president and founder of Bhasin Consulting, which is an equity, diversity, inclusion consulting firm that's focused on building more inclusive, empowered, and authentic workplaces and society at large. And it is such a privilege, a blessing, an honor to have you join us today for BCI's November free webinar. And so, as always, I feel so grateful whenever you all join us for these learning opportunities. I wanted to start off by, first of all, just taking a moment to pause to honor that I am joining you today from my home in Toronto, Canada, which is where I have been joining you from since last March. Anywho, Toronto, as you may know, is in the Dish with One Spoon territory, which is a treaty between the Haudenosaunee, the Anishinaabe, and the Mississaugas, a treaty that brought these communities together to serve and to honor and to protect these lands. And we have all been invited into this treaty with the same spirit. And I share this with you as part of my personal commitment to truth and reconciliation and healing with the Indigenous peoples of this land that we now know to be Canada, and my team's commitment to the same. It is such a great priority for us at BCI that we continue to work on not only decolonizing our own individual hearts, minds, and spirits, but also through our work, deeply dig deep into helping to decolonize our practices in workplaces and in society at large as part of truth and reconciliation with the Indigenous peoples of Canada. And I take this message really seriously. I hold this spirit so deeply in my heart. And if you have been joining us for the last, well, almost 2 years, you'll know that this spirit is deeply embedded into the work that we do. And so I want this spirit to carry through our session today. I know it will, but I'm also going to invite you to just take a moment to honor the lands that you find yourselves on today. And so with those very important words being said, I just want to turn to one more housekeeping matter before we dig deep into our session today with Melinda, which I'm very, very, very excited for. So a few housekeeping matters. We are using Zoomaroo. We have been Zooming for a while, as you know. I'm sure a lot of you have been Zooming it up as well. So we're using Zoom webinar in particular. We cannot see you, we cannot hear you, but as always with the BCI webinar, we want lots of active participation. And so given this, I'm going to encourage you to throw your questions up into the Q&A box, which you'll find at the bottom of the Zoom toolbar. We will also be heavily using the chat board. And so today in particular, since I'm joined by Melinda Briana Epler, who's an expert on allyship, I am going to actively seek out your participation as audience members in asking lots of questions. So if you have not already done so, would you please open up your chat board? So you can throw your questions into the Q&A box, but also we're going to actively use the chat board. So you'll see on the chat board, lots of activity already. We're welcoming you. Lots of love for Bhangra music, which is Punjabi dance music. And as you may know, I'm Punjabi and I'm all about Punjabi dance music. I'm all about music, period, but Punjabi dance music in particular, love it. And so we're going to use the chat board for call and response. I'm going to ask you to put your questions in there if you'd like. I'm also going to invite you to throw your comments up into the chat board as well. And so to get us all warmed up in using the chat board, if you could please open it up, and where it says to, please highlight everyone so that we all get the benefit of your feedback, of your remarks. And I'm going to invite you to answer the following question in the chat board as a warm-up. I think I've used this question before, but it's one of my favorites, so just roll with me. So let's just do it. Here's my question for you. In this moment, what is one thing that you are grateful for? One thing that you are grateful for. And I'm writing down Melinda because I love Melinda so much, and I'm so grateful that she's here with us. And so look at this, lots and lots of sunshine, weather, family, friends, fur babies. We love fur babies. Oh, for me and Melinda, thank you so much. Children, mamas, health, all of this. Okay, I love this. I want you to know some days when I'm having a dark day or difficult day, I will put in, as I'm sure you have seen me do in the last 20 months, red lipstick, because that's the only thing in that moment that I feel grateful for, or I took a breath. Sometimes it's just that I took a breath, and I'm grateful for that too. So lots of gratitude. Really great to see this all. Thank you so much, everyone. And this is exactly how we are going to use the chat board. So let's keep that coming. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is we're going to get into the meat of today's webinar. And so as you may know, with BCI webinars, and actually in the chat box, oh, thank you so much. Melinda has put into the chat box how it is that you can figure out which lands that you are on in order to be in a place where you can honor, acknowledge the lands. Thank you so much. native-land.ca, which, by the way, I'm going to throw out there. Hello, most Americans rely on, well, as Canadians, we rely on American resources a lot. I'm so glad that globally people can rely on Canadian resources. I'm all about that. Yay. In the chat board, can you just put a yes or no up if you have joined us before for a BCI webinar so that we can just track and follow that? Seeing a bunch of yeses and a handful of no's, but yay. For those of you who have joined us before, thank you so much. Welcome back. For those of you who haven't, welcome. So excited to have you here. Okay, let's get into it. So much has been said over the last, 20 months, let's say, about the importance of allyship in society at large, but in particular in the workplace. And as it relates to fostering equity, to creating spaces of psychological safety, trust, belonging, to cultivating environments where people can feel like they belong and they can be authentic, to cultivating experiences of wellness. Allyship is, the conversation around allyship is everywhere. I will say this, I have found that as we're tapering into the end of 2021, entering into 2022, I feel like the steam and the momentum around allyship in some respects isn't as intense as it was last year. And I look forward to talking to you about that, Melinda, today. But we thought it would be great to dig deep into a conversation around allyship. But more importantly, I am just so delighted to be joined by Melinda Briana Epler, who, as you can already tell, I have great affection for. She's a good friend of mine now. Melinda is the author of a brand new book that just was released back in September called How to Be an Ally: Actions You Can Take for a Stronger, Happier Workplace. Now, as you may know, everyone, my bar is really high for DEI content. If you get our Monday emails or you're on a mailing list, you'll know that my bar is really high. And I have been longing, craving, deeply desiring for someone to write a book on allyship. And then Melinda came along and told me that she was writing her book on allyship. And I was like, I can't wait to read your book on allyship. And then I read Melinda's book on allyship and I was like, this is excellent. Actually, I read the manuscript and then I was like, I can't wait for your book to come out. And then in September, Melinda's great book came out. Now, Melinda, as you may know, also has a TED Talk on allyship, which has been watched almost 3 million times. She's the CEO of a leading change innovation DEI organization called Change Catalyst. And it's just such a change agent and an advocate for allyship. And so I'm so excited to have Melinda here. The last thing I'll mention before I open it up, Melinda, to you, is that I know Melinda. How I came across Melinda was, now I'm going to say 5, 6, 7 years ago. I can't exactly remember, but I was in San Francisco for a yoga mindfulness conference, and they actually happened to have a panel discussion on inclusion tied to mindfulness. And I was like, that is my jam. I'm going to go and check it out. So I went to the panel and Melinda was one of the panelists. And I was like, I must meet that woman. And I went up to Melinda afterwards. And like when someone speaks and then you go and approach the person and then you fangirl all over them and then you exchange information, but you're like, is the person ever going to talk to me? Well, here we are today. And I'm so grateful for our friendship, but also your wisdom, Melinda. So first of all, thank you for joining us at BCI's webinar and welcome. And then how are you?
Hi, thank you. Well, thank you for that amazing introduction. And I'm really grateful for you pursuing our friendship and really making sure that we did have coffee while you were in town and continue to. And I'm so grateful for your friendship and allyship both. I am well. It is a sunny day in San Francisco here where I am. And I want to acknowledge that I live and work on the traditional land of the Ramaytush Ohlone peoples here in Yalnamu, and honor and respect their elders, both past, present, and emerging as well. That I am living and working in this unceded ancestral homeland and commit to redressing the legacies of that colonialism.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. So let's get into it. And everyone, again, this is going to be a banter between me and Melinda, but we welcome any questions. Some of you did, in fact, send questions in advance. So thank you so much for that. We're going to do our best to get to all your questions. So please throw them up. Also, if you send us questions through the Q&A box or directly to me, Ritu Bhasin, you have my personal commitment that I will do my best to get to your question, but I will not share your identity because I know sometimes we like to ask questions without identity shared. So I wanted to mention that. Okay, so Melinda, before we start getting into hardcore concepts, and I do really want to dig into some of the important principles you have in the book and your research report that came out, which, by the way, everyone, you'll get resources by way of email today to a bunch of what we're talking about. So stay tuned on that. Allyship really is your anchor. Like you've done a TED talk on it. You now have a book on it. You have a podcast on allyship as well. Maybe you can share a little bit about that. Can you tell us a little bit about how it is that allyship has come to become your anchor? Like, what is it about your upbringing or your value system or your spirit that has been so drawn towards allyship?
Yeah. And when I was asked to do the TED Talk, actually, I was asked to do the TED Talk on a different topic. And I really advocated for allyship to be that topic because I wanted to use that platform to really create change. I've been focused on making the world a better place pretty much my whole life from the beginning. So I know not everybody is set out to do that in their life, in their lifetime, but that has definitely been where I have felt that my place was in the world to really create change. And I believe that allyship has the power to transform the world, allyship is empathy in action. And we don't have enough empathy in the world. I think we need to show more empathy in the world, show more empathy in the world. And for me, that lack of empathy and the lack of allyship is actually the root of a lot of the biggest issues in the world, from climate change and environmental injustice to workplace disparity to wealth gap, health gap, discrimination throughout our systems and institutions. It's really, when we step up and do the work to have empathy and show empathy and take action with empathy, we make different decisions for each other. So my upbringing, I was born in San Francisco, grew up in Oakland, and then in South Seattle, and both of those are very diverse places. And so I had diverse friends growing up and went to public schools. I actually believe everybody should go to public schools. It made a big difference in my life. And I didn't realize that was unusual, that, a few years ago, there was a study that came out that showed that 70% of white people only have white friends. And that was not the case for me. So I didn't realize that was unusual. But even so, I grew up thinking that racism was a historical phenomenon, that I thought we were in a post-racial world until I got to college. And I ran across some Black students on campus that were talking about their experiences. And I sat and listened and kind of went through all the stages of denial and then acceptance and realizing that I was wrong. And so really spent my life my life in school, working to better understand different cultures. I studied cultural anthropology, I studied behavioral science, kind of learning how people create change and how people change, and organizational change management and storytelling. So I was a documentary filmmaker for a while, and worked to create social change and social impact through the storytelling, and then moved from that into working with companies around social impact and using those same tools for social impact. Ended up being an executive and hit the glass ceiling really hard there. Was in a very toxic workplace with microaggressions and harassment, and kind of had an aha moment that I wanted to change the whole industry, the whole tech industry. So left my job as an executive to start Change Catalyst to really address diversity, equity, inclusion in the tech industry. And so my path to allyship was I've been doing this work for years, working on diversity, equity, and inclusion, and realized that it's not enough for D&I folks, for HR folks to be pushing this change, that it's really all of us are part of those workplace systems, utilizing those workplace systems, perpetuating the inequities in those systems. And we all have work to do within, and we all have work to do to create change. To create more equity in our workplaces.
Yeah. You've already said so much, like there's so much packed into what you have just shared. Today, we have a lot of people joining, wearing their workplace hats, leaders, HR professionals, team members who are really actively interested in becoming better, more impactful allies. And so I'm going to do my best to like focus our questions from a workplace context, but I recognize so much of what you have said really does emphasize or highlight the importance of allyship in our broader societal, from a broader societal perspective. So let's do this, because I suspect as well, there's a mix of understanding as well joining us today around what is allyship. In your book, in the podcast, but also you have an excellent report out called The State of Allyship, which everyone, we will give you, I'll send you a link to in the resources we provide afterwards. Can you talk a little bit about the definition of allyship from a workplace perspective? And in particular, maybe highlighting some key findings, but in particular, a lot of people use the term allyship. Some people use co-conspirator, some people use accomplice. Like there's a lot of language in this space. I know you have very granular thoughts on this. So could you shed some light on what is allyship, the language attached to it, the different stages, and based on your research?
Sure. So allyship at its core is empathy in action. What I said earlier, that is really seeing the person in front of us, learning their unique experiences, their unique worldviews, really not taking our own worldviews and placing that upon theirs. It's really learning their own worldviews and unique experiences, and then supporting them. In my book, I walk through 7 different steps of allyship, but essentially it is learning, unlearning, and relearning, because we haven't been told everything in our lives. And there's some real gaps in our history. There's some real gaps, even in Wikipedia. Wikipedia really struggles with diversity in their teams, and that affects how we perceive our history even today. So, when I was growing up, I didn't learn so much, and there's so much to do there. So learning, unlearning, relearning, learning to do no harm, interrupting our biases and microaggressions, advocating for people, really being people's champions, and really using your power and your influence and your privilege to help create change in their lives, and then leading the change, really creating more diverse, equitable, and inclusive teams and workplaces. So we really, as allies, we understand that imbalance and opportunity and work to change it, so everybody has opportunity to succeed and thrive. So stages, yeah.
Sorry, no, please go ahead.
Yeah. So the stages of allyship. So I talked about behavioral change and behavioral science. People don't go from not knowing anything about it to suddenly becoming an activist in the deepest sense, right? We go through a series of changes, like in any kind of behavior shift. And so most of us start with denial. We start with that. I did, as you know, I mentioned, that I was in this post-racial society that doesn't exist. And so most of us start in denial. And then as we kind of have that aha moment, and our research shows that most of the time people have that aha moment by hearing somebody else's experiences or experiencing it ourselves. And so that's the power of storytelling, is when we share our experiences,
Right.
we might be really shifting people's perspectives.
Which is why,
Yeah.
Melinda, sorry, I just wanted to add, and sorry to interrupt, why it is that it's so important that as DEI professionals, as HR leaders, we create safe spaces within our workplaces to hear about the lived experience of inequities and exclusion, because a lot of times leaders will have the mistaken belief that may be happening in that organization, but it's certainly not happening here. And this is why storytelling or sharing the lived truth of our experiences is so important, because it helps to push out of denial. I think that's what I hear you saying. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And also sharing those experiences allows people to understand what you need from allies, what's needed from allies, so we're not making assumptions, that we're actually listening to what people need to.
Right.
Yeah. So we move from denial to observation. So being an observer is kind of testing that new understanding. Is also storytelling can help there as well. And so hopefully we don't stay in as an observer for too long. We start learning. We start taking in new information. Unlearning as well, relearning as well. And then as we grow in our learning and understanding, we take action as an ally. And it's important that we get beyond learning. Learning is a continuous process throughout the whole journey of allyship, right? But we need to go beyond learning to take action as an ally. Otherwise, it's just performative. It's not real allyship. And so, as an ally, we're activated. We're interrupting any harm and intervening. As well as really doing our own work internally. And then beyond allyship is advocacy, is really leading the change. That could be leading the change as a manager, as a leader, as an influencer in your company. That could be leading the change in your neighborhood and so on as well. An accomplice is someone who kind of takes advocacy to the next level of breaking the rules to help dismantle those systems, to dismantle inequitable structures for the benefit of other people. That actually takes, sometimes literally breaking the law in the case of protesting, and sometimes it takes really breaking down workplace systems and rebuilding them with people with underrepresented identities, and in a way that is equitable.
And can I ask you,
Yeah.
so in the workplace, what would it look like to be an accomplice?
It would look like, if you're a hiring manager, it would be really completely reassessing that hiring process from beginning to end. You can wipe the slate, or you can just kind of break it down piece by piece and rebuild it, so that you're not unintentionally excluding people throughout that process. From beginning to end, from the point of telling your story and sourcing candidates through the interview and then the offer. There's a lot of inequity in offers as well. So really dismantling that whole system.
Would moving away from the concept of targets and instead putting in quotas fall under being an accomplice?
I think that that's, I do think it's important to do that, to have goals. I would say goals rather than quotas, because quotas definitely has a stigma here in a lot of workplaces. So
100%.
goals. Yeah. And I think that falls in the advocacy. For me, that falls in the advocate category of, set those goals, make those goals happen. Sometimes to get those goals to really meet your goals, you do have to kind of dismantle some stuff.
But being an accomplice is actually about dismantling existing systems and creating new systems. So like new ways of recruiting, for example, or completely gutting the way in which we're engaging in performance management or how work is being allocated. So it's dismantling what exists and then creating something new that reflects equity concepts.
Yeah, and doing it in collaboration with the most excluded and marginalized people. Yeah.
Got it. Okay, perfect.
Yeah.
Thank you for because I know that in my work in allyship, the questions that I get asked a lot about are like, what is accomplice compared to being an ally? So I thought that would be useful to dig a bit deeper there. Anyhow, sorry.
And then the last stage is activism. You and I are activists. We're dedicating our lives and our careers to really creating change at a systemic level.
Got it.
Yeah.
So I love this. And so first of all, these 7 stages, 7 stages along the journey. In the chat board, is this resonating with you? Can you just let us know if you're following? Yes, no, somewhat. What's connecting as it relates to the 7 stages? Are you with us? Because there's a lot of conversation around allyship, but the thing that I love about Melinda's work in particular is that it's granular. Like it takes these larger macro concepts and actually brings them into like nitty gritty, like what do you do to be an ally? Okay, great. Glad to see it's resonating. Please feel free to keep your questions, comments, thoughts coming. We'd love to hear from you. So let's spend a little bit of time talking about how do you actually step up and be an ally? So for example, not everyone can be an activist in the workplace. And as Melissa's noted, you don't want to break the law in the workplace. I hear all of that. But what are some of the behaviors that actually help to signal that you're serving as an ally in the workplace? And so, for example, let me make this more granular. Let's pretend you observe a micro inequity. So someone interrupts a woman as she's speaking, or another person of color is interrupted, or their idea is co-opted in a meeting, or there's a negative remark, or there's the, wow, that person of color is so articulate. So you overhear a micro inequity. What would allyship look like on a micro granular level?
Yeah, the first step of allyship is really hearing that as a microaggression, right? Is so sometimes that means doing the work to learn that, to start. And I will say that I have a section in my book dedicated to what's wrong with saying someone is articulate, because it comes up so much in my trainings, especially at the leadership level. When I say that and I talk about it as being a microaggression, so many people are like, wait, what? And I suspect people here, there may be some people listening too, because the next reaction with a lot of people is, oh, but I'm meaning it as a compliment. And so that's where we separate intent from impact, right? And we really understand the context within which that comment sits, that there is that Black people in particular are here. You're so articulate so much more often than anybody else, especially white people, right? And so I had when I was leading a workshop, a leadership workshop, a Black executive explained to me that it's a backhanded compliment, right? That you're telling me, she said, that that you're surprised that I'm an exception to how you see Black people, and that I can speak well as compared to other Black people. What does that mean? It's not within the normal realm of compliments and doesn't make her feel good. And that's the key, is that a compliment is supposed to make somebody feel good. So if your intention is to pay somebody a compliment, do your work as an ally to use a phrase that they will receive as a compliment, right? So, so in that moment, you hear somebody say, she's so articulate. I would assume that there was no intentional harm created by that comment, right? So that means you have an opportunity to educate that person. So you, Daryl Dwing Su has written books about microaggressions, and his model is basically to pause, disarm, and educate. So you can pause in that moment and say, wait a minute, I just want to, acknowledge that that's actually not a compliment. Here's why. I used to think that that was a compliment. You can talk about your own process. That can sometimes help disarm and decrease the defensiveness that might come out as a result. So you want to disarm because there's power disparity in microaggressions, and interrupt in some way there. It's important not to shame anybody. Shame is not a motivator for change. So you really want to call people in, bring people in, share your learnings, and hope that they can kind of internalize that learning. And also you want to recognize that there was harm created, right? And that is important too. So in addition to kind of educating and disarming and educating, you want to treat the impact as well. So check in with that person afterwards. That is really key. And if you don't do anything else, if you miss the moment, you can always, go back afterwards and have a one-on-one with somebody, and also go to the person who experienced that microaggression and let them know that you saw it. And because that recognition can be so huge for somebody, just in that recognition that, oh, somebody else in the room saw it, it wasn't just me.
Yeah. I've already had a number of questions, follow-up questions pop up based on what you've shared. You, again, shared so much there, and I have some thoughts too. So exciting. Everyone, I love this. I love this. This is exactly what we want to have happen on our BCI webinars. Okay. So the person says, oh, you're so Syra, you're so articulate. And should you, as the ally, say something right then and there in the moment, or should you say it after the fact?
I would say it depends. It depends, one, on if the intent was, there is while it's important to understand the distinction between intent and impact and really focus on the impact, it's also important to know the intent, because if the intent was to harm somebody, that's a whole different intervention. And you might not want to do that in the moment. It depends on kind of your own safety and the safety of the person who's experiencing that microaggression. So that's really important. And then the second is, sometimes it takes a while for us to kind of get there, to get to the fact that, I should say something, and then the moment is kind of past. You can always bring it up later in that conversation, and say, I just want to recall something that happened a bit ago, and just acknowledge that, that was actually a microaggression, and you can do it in the, still within that meeting or that situation, or one-on-one after the fact. And so think about your own safety, think about what the person who's experiencing a microaggression would want in that moment, if you can too, right? Yeah. That's important. And then you can also do it one-on-one afterwards. Sometimes that's the most appropriate way. I would recommend, if you're ready for it, do it in the moment. If not, do it after the fact.
Yeah. So one of the things that I often share, and it definitely echoes what you're saying, Melinda, is that sometimes in the moment, we just don't feel safe to speak. How about this? How about this? As an ally, how many times have we been in situations where someone says something and I am activated too? And I'm like, did that just happen here? And is someone going to say something? And my nervous system is activated. And so I'm not in a place where I respond right then and there. One of the questions we got in advance from an audience member is, what do you do about micro inequities or examples of bias, oppression, and more that we've seen in the past? And is it too late, or how do you go about following up on those? And so sometimes you can't address the situation in the moment, but it's never too late. Like, and I'm a big believer in if it's like 3 days later, 2 weeks later, 3 weeks later, even a year later. Like, I have last year, when we put a rightful spotlight in a very, very visible way on anti-Black racism, I was deeply digging into, despite being an anti-racism activist, as a woman of color who is not Black, as a South Asian person, I was digging deep into how anti-Blackness lives in me as well. And I was working on, how do I interrupt that? And I reached out to a Black friend of mine and said, I know I did this many years ago. I remember you gave me some feedback back then, and I can tell you, you communicated that you were upset with me. I just wanted to follow up with you to say, I understand deeply now about how problematic my behavior was, and I'm so sorry. And we had a conversation about it. So it can even be years later that we're following up on the act. It doesn't have to happen in the moment. The other thing I was going to mention, and I love what you just shared here, Melinda. And by the way, there's some questions in the board, at the chat board, if you want to take a gander there. In the meantime, something that Melinda said really resonated with me, which is that acknowledging that we too may have engaged in a similar type of micro inequity in the past can really help our conversation. So for example, if I observe someone say, wow, Syra is so articulate, in following up with that person afterwards to signal that this is a micro inequity, I like the idea of saying, I just wanted to share with you that the comment that you made at the team meeting around Syra being so articulate, it just gave me a moment to pause, because it's language that I might have used years ago. Or you could say something like, in learning a lot about racial inclusion, anti-Black racism, or anti-racism on a whole, we're really trying to work on interrupting micro inequities. There's a lot of feedback out there that comments like that are micro inequities and are actually really offensive and hurt people's feelings. And so I wanted to share this with you and bring this forward to you as a way, because on our team, we're so deeply committed to being inclusive, and we're holding each other accountable and blah, 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 blah. Yeah. So like, this is the kind of language that you can be using, or you can decide on whatever language you want to use to have these conversations, but you can plan them out in advance. They don't have to happen in the moment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I want to iterate again that the impact is beyond the moment. Right. The impact can last a lifetime, right? We know that from research that microaggressions can have short and long-term impact on people's health, people's wealth, people's careers, right? So checking in on the impact and working to you can counter microaggression impact with microaffirmations, with advocacy, with really changing systems and processes to make it less likely that situation would occur in the future. All of those things are also acts of allyship that are really important.
Yeah, I hear all of that. I love all of what you're sharing here, Melinda. Thank you so much. There's a really interesting question on the board from Darwin. And if I understand the question correctly, I think the question that's being put forward is, it ties back to what we were sharing earlier about the importance of storytelling and being in a place where we actually learn about the lived experiences around exclusion in the workplace. So how can we create these experiences such that it doesn't create a spirit of like, as Darwin mentions, like grief entertainment, or like the idea being like, we have people of color, for example, talking about their experiences with racism, or people from the LGBTQ communities talking about their experiences with heterosexism or transphobia and more. And then people who are cisgender and hetero are just sitting on the sidelines, eating popcorn, watching and like taking it all in, or white people are like, oh, this is like, it's like becomes entertaining. Or another way we've seen it's referenced on, for example, on social media. I'm very active on Instagram, and I know Melinda's active on Instagram as well, because we always are messaging each other. Anyways, whatever. It's like trauma porn, where it's like people are sharing their lived experiences, and then others are just standing by watching, eating popcorn, taking in the grief. How can we mitigate against that? And Darwin, I hope I got your question correctly. If I did, can you just signal so? But Melinda, you have thoughts on that? Okay, Darwin's like, yes, great, thank you.
Awesome. Yes. Well, for one, you don't create change in your organization just by having conversations, right? That you really need to go deeper into helping people internalize this and take action, right? So conversations can be a piece of it, but there needs to be training, there needs to be workshops, there needs to be like accountability and goal setting around doing the work. So that is key. Nobody wants to pour their heart and soul and bear their heart and soul only to have no action taken. Action has to be taken as a result of that, because that is a real work that somebody is doing and real trauma that somebody is sharing. So that is one. I will also say that it's really important to, for the burden of learning and education to not come to the people who are most marginalized and discriminated systemically, right? So that is another key piece of this, is that we have to do our own work around education and not ask or make or make people with marginalized identities really do more the work of educating us. There's a lot of work out there. There's a lot of great books out there. There's a lot of great articles out there. Do our own work is really important around education. Having said that, there's definitely a lot of systemically marginalized people that really want to create change and are ready to tell their stories and want to tell their stories too. So making a safe, psychologically safe space to do that is really important as well.
Yeah. One thought that I had as well, and Melinda, let me know if this resonates, is oftentimes what can be really effective is having the stories shared, gathered, collected in communities, like in circles where people are all similarly situated, like from the same community. So for example, when professionals of color within a workplace environment are sharing, they're just amidst professionals of color, with either leaders from who are also professionals of color, or you've hired outside people who've come in to gather the stories. And that way there isn't an observation for entertainment purposes. It's the gathering of the stories in a safe space. And then themes and sound bites are presented back to leadership. That's another way to do it without putting the onus or the burden or the spotlight on people to share in the midst of spectators. So it feels more like a sport. So I'm a big fan of doing that as well. So have people come together based on their shared life experiences and identities. Either have people within the organization who are from the same community groups, or people you hire who are from those groups collect the stories and then present back themes and sound bites.
Yeah, absolutely.
Is there something else you wanted to add? Otherwise, Melinda, there's more questions. There's like, we're getting so many questions. I want to get as many of the audience questions in as possible.
Let's get to the questions.
Okay. So performative allyship, can you just dig deeper into what that is about and how dangerous and insidious it can be?
Yeah, performative allyship is saying that you care, but not putting action to it. So, for a company to do that, it can look like putting out a Black Lives Matter statement, but not actually doing the systemic internal work to to correct the inequities within your workplace, right? And for a person to do it is, putting a black square on your Instagram account. It's saying that I care about and that I care about Black lives, but not actually taking any action to address the systemic inequity that we're still that we might still be benefiting from in some way, right? So that is at its core. I don't know if you want to say more than that, Ritu.
Yeah, like I think to myself, like, as you know, I'm a big advocate for authenticity and psychological safety, trust, belonging, given that like I've written a book on this space and I'm like deeply, deeply committed to like, how can people feel safe to be who they are, especially in workplace cultures. And I think about how performative allyship strikes at our ability to be authentic. It strikes at our ability to belong. 100%. It strikes at our ability to feel safe, to be seen, to be heard, and more. Why? What do I mean by that? If we're in a workplace culture where people are saying, oh, I really care about making sure that women feel supported, and moms in particular, and like, oh, we really care about cultivating mental health, wellness, and preventing burnout. And oh, we really care about interrupting racism, but then nothing changes. In fact, people are saying, I'm really exhausted and I need more support as it relates to my mental health. And we're just pouring on the work. And, or if we're saying like, we care about racism, but then we're like actually not shifting the way in which we're mentoring, sponsoring, giving out work and more, or we're not actually being more flexible and agile in how we help people who have high levels of caregiving responsibilities. It's performative, but also what that makes the person feel like is, you don't care about me. You don't give a shit.
Mhm.
You don't see me. You don't understand me. You say you do, but you really don't. And in fact, it's even more hurtful that you're saying that you care and you're doing things, but you're not doing anything. And in fact, I feel less safe now and I feel less able to share. I just shared with you that I have lived experience with diminished mental health, and you said you were going to do something, you did nothing about it. And now I feel really silly for sharing. I feel stupid for sharing with you in the first place. Like, it literally strikes at our ability to belong, to be authentic, to feel safe, to be, to live out trust. And I think it's Nia on the board just said, it confirms they are indeed as invisible as they feel. Yes, it reaffirms our experiences with inequities. And so this is why performative allyship, in my view, is just so harmful.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I do think allies need to be authentic. I love that. Good allies really know themselves well. You know your own values and you live those values, right? That means if you believe that there is inequity, that you're acting to change that. That if one of your values is justice and fairness, then that you're actively working, you're being authentic with yourself, you're being in alignment with your own self, and really taking action as a result. And even when we might be more tired, even when we might be burnt out right now, right?
Yeah.
In this moment is when we act in empathy, when we act with allyship, we're actually, our endorphins, it can, and our adrenaline can, help us actually be happier humans, happier people in the workplace too, right? So it's, we may think that we can't do it because we're stuck right now, we're in this space right now, but it actually can help you get out of that space, right?
Totally. Love that. Okay. More questions from the audience. So do you have any feedback guidance on allyship during this upcoming winter holiday season, like especially around religious differences? So for example, when we know that a lot of the holidays coming up in December are Christian centric, like how do you be an ally in the context of that without, the person said, feeling like Grinch? How can we be allies in terms of increasing inclusion during the holiday season? And by the way, let's say holiday season, like even like in a few weeks, we have American Thanksgiving coming up. Canadian Thanksgiving passed in October because we're colder than you all. And so our harvest happens earlier, everyone. We did Thanksgiving like early October. And so thoughts on that?
Yeah, one is if you're in a position to change it, is definitely have floating holidays in your company, right? So that everybody can have their own holidays, that they're not forced to take Christmas off, that you can have your own holiday. That's one. Acknowledging that there are different cultural traditions and religious traditions, and during the holidays is really important, and not centering Christian as the norm, right? And everybody else is the exception. Really important. I had a third thought and I lost it.
Well, how about this? While you're thinking of your third thought, I'm going to throw something out.
Yeah.
So, because something you said popped into my mind. So last Thursday was Diwali, although Diwali celebrations spread over a few days. But last Thursday in particular, I noticed actually that this year in particular, like Diwali was celebrated significantly more than it has been, like on social media, parties, people, like I did more for Diwali. And I think it's like a response to, we did nothing last year and life is horrible and we're not doing anything. And like everyone just wanted to see their people in their community. And so Diwali was everywhere. One of the ways that we can be an ally in the context of the winter holiday season coming up, and the Christian holidays in particular, like let's name it, December, people's minds go to Christmas, Christian holidays. One of the ways that we can be allies is not minimizing the Christian experience of Christmas during December. It's ramping up the attention and effort we put on other holidays from other communities throughout the course of the year. So I'm a big believer, like over the last few decades, it's like, in order to be inclusive, now what we'll do is we'll stop saying Merry Christmas. And in order to be inclusive, we won't talk about this topic and this topic and we just start drawing circles around things like that. To me is not inclusion. Inclusion is, it's Christmas. Merry Christmas to those who celebrate Christmas. Happy the Diwali to those who celebrate Diwali. Happy Chinese New Year to people who celebrate Happy Chinese New Year. Like, it's not taking away to make room for others. It's making space for other experiences to be celebrated. And by the way, that's a very different mindset. It's a shift in mindset. It's about abundance rather than scarcity. It's if we say Merry Christmas, then we can't, then the other people will get offended. So we'll just take away Merry Christmas. It's no, say Merry Christmas to people who are celebrating and move over and make room to celebrate others and other people's experiences. It's a shift in mindset.
Yeah, absolutely. 100% agree. Yeah. And the only other thing I would say about Thanksgiving, in particular, because that was brought up, is Thanksgiving is a really convoluted holiday. There's a lot in there. There's some really, the origins of it are awful. But also giving thanks and gratitude is great. And so, it is complex, right? But it is really important to not perpetuate stereotypes around Thanksgiving, right? So if your kids are going to school and there's stereotypes being perpetuated in the artwork that they're doing around Thanksgiving, right? Educate teachers around it. Educate your children as well around how that can be harmful. And make sure that you're not perpetuating those stereotypes as well. And really educate yourself and others around what actually happened to Indigenous people during that time. That it was not a pleasant harvest. There's actually a recent article that came about, I think it was in the New York Times recently, around Thanksgiving and what the Indigenous people actually experienced at that time. And it was very much not that. What Native people were experiencing that time was genocide.
I was going to say, let's call it what it, genocide. Right.
90%,
normalize the use of genocide. 100%.
90% of Indigenous people died due to colonialism during that time. And that's called the Great Dying. And it's something that we didn't learn in schools. And it's really important to educate ourselves about and stop perpetuating a myth that we tell around Thanksgiving, that it is really, we need to really change that and acknowledge the Indigenous people that are living and honor them.
Yeah, I hear you on all of that. I echo all of that as well. Okay, we have only a few more minutes remaining. Time is flying. I could talk to you forever, Melinda. I know, right? So good. Time flies when you are having fun. Yeah. So let me ask you this. How can we be allies in the remote world? So here we are, remote world, hybrid world. What can allyship look like in the remote world?
Yeah, I think, it's a lot of it is the same in person versus remote. And I would say that one of the things that I hear a lot of excuses. Well, right now we're working remotely, so I can't really be an ally. I can't really mentor people right now. Well, of course you can. You can mentor people. You have to actively set aside time to do it. And also one of the things that gets lost in the remote workplace is often building empathy for each other. So if you're a manager, if you're a leader, even anybody on a team can help build moments where the team is getting to know each other more deeply outside of project-based work, outside of work. Is so schedule water cooler moments, right? Because we don't have them in the remote workplace. We have to schedule them, schedule virtual coffees and group conversations and kind of interactive ways for the team to learn about each other, because that understanding and empathy is really important. A lot of people are experiencing burnout right now, and so check in with them. If you see that somebody is a little bit checked out, check in.
Yeah.
See how they're doing. How can you support them?
Yeah.
And really make the space for that. And part of that support might be, can I take some workload? Can I support you in that way? What can I do to help? And also there's I think a lot of people forget that microaggressions can occur in Zoom, that we are seeing this and it's heightened as a result. So our facial expressions can be microaggressions, right? If I'm not paying attention while you're speaking and looking over here, even if I'm looking at a monitor, change your setup so that you are, giving people your full attention and giving people somebody to react to. We go from Zoom meeting to Zoom meeting, and as a result of that, sometimes take that energy from the last meeting into the next meeting, and that energy can be on our faces. So if it was a frustrating meeting, we come in with frustration. If it was, if it was an angry meeting, we might come in with anger on our faces, and that can really make a big difference in how somebody shows up on the other end of that Zoom.
Totally.
In front of you. And so take the moments between meetings to reset. Check in with each other. If you're a manager, make sure you're scheduling one-on-ones regularly and giving people feedback, because feedback is so important to growth. And when we're not giving it, people don't have that opportunity to grow. So
love it. Love all of that. Okay, we have only a few minutes remaining. I'm going to ask you one last question. Maybe you can do it in like 60 seconds or less. And then I want to talk about how you can be in touch with Melinda and important takeaways. The last question I have is the momentum around allyship. Does it feel like it's fizzling to you compared to, say, last year, post George Floyd's murder through the course of 2020? And if it does, or even if it doesn't, how do you think we keep allyship front and center in workplace culture?
Yeah, momentum is, there is less momentum, there's less protests and less public kind of push for change. And to some degree that, that kind of heightened level of collective anxiety and action at that heightened level is not sustainable, right? So, we have to internally keep that going, and really, the easiest part is to walk through the streets and in protest. The harder part is to dismantle the systems and structures, right? So, so now we have to do the hard work, and so yes. I think this is no more than 60 seconds, but push for change in your organization. Push for change in your organization. Don't let up. Don't let up. More leaders are open to change now. More leaders are open to this work. I will say that. There's no question in my mind. So tell them you care and really push for change in your organization, because that continued push is going to continue to push them to create change. And then, be authentic and align with your own values. Like we talked about before, don't let it be until the next major tragedy. There's lots of tragedies happening every day, but then the next public tragedy to remind you to do the work. Do it now.
Right. I'm so with you. Speaking of doing the work, I wanted to say, Melinda, there are so many great strategies and tools and resources that you have out there to help people do the work. On that note, I just wanted to take a moment to showcase for you all of the ways in which Melinda's resources on allyship can support you. First of all, you can visit Change Catalysts, the organization that Melinda co-founded and runs. They have a range of offerings, including trainings on allyship. And so you can be in touch with Melinda for that. Her TED Talk on allyship is out there in the world. She's active on social media, LinkedIn, Instagram in particular. As I mentioned, her and I are Instagram buddies. We're constantly messaging. but her book in particular, I'm just going to throw out there again, it's excellent. It has the Ritu Bhasin stamp of approval, which, if I may say so, is a pretty good stamp because I read a lot in this space. The other thing I'll mention is writing a book is really difficult. And so supporting authors is really critical. There's two ways that you can support Melinda. Number one, you can buy the book. And number two, in particular, do a review for it on Amazon, because algorithms, the reviews matter. And I wanted to pass that along. If you want to get a hold of Melinda after today, you can contact her via Change Catalyst. If you want to contact us at BCI, you can reach out to us through info@basinconsulting.com. We are going to continue doing lots of free webinars at BCI. In fact, we're announcing our December webinar next week. Stay tuned. If you're not signed up for our mailing list, you definitely want to get on that, and you can go to basinconsulting.com for that. So before we officially wind down, I wanted to say, Melinda, thank you so much to you for joining us today. I'm so grateful. I really, really appreciate your time and effort today. So thank you for joining us.
Yeah, thank you for hosting this conversation and doing all the work that you do and being an ally and an advocate and an activist. And yeah, it's so important. And thank you all for your comments and your questions and your moments of appreciation too. I appreciate that too.
Yes, thank you everyone for joining, and thank you to the team at BCI as always for doing your excellent work and supporting everything that we do. I couldn't do it without you. So thank you, everyone. We will see you in December. Be well, Melinda. Be well, everyone. Be healthy, whole, happy, safe, and we will see you soon. Bye now.